Imagine, in the early spring of 1913, G.H. Hardy, a preeminent professor of mathematics at Trinity College, Cambridge, received a thick, travel-worn letter whose handwriting appeared almost childlike. Within those pages, there were no polite pleasantries, only a dense, staggering array of over 100 incomprehensible mathematical formulas. Hardy initially dismissed it as the mere ramblings of a crank, yet as his eyes traversed those symbols, a chill ran down his spine. Some were the known summits of mathematics, while others were entirely unheard of, divine revelations seemingly dredged directly from the deepest wells of truth. The sender claimed to be a lowly clerk from South India named Srimavasa Ramanujan. Tonight, by the soft pulse of the firelight, let us traverse the path of his true life through this story, one you need not labor to remember. He was a mathematical mystic who never received a formal higher education, claiming instead that all his knowledge was whispered to him by a goddess in his dreams. His life was the ultimate collision between intuition and logic, a silent gambit between faith and the profound loneliness of a foreign land. In the time that follows, let us quiet our hearts and witness how this saint of mathematics, in a life of just 32 years, overran the intellectual limits of humanity for the century to come. If truth possessed a physical form, in Ramanujan's eyes, it was not found in the sterile pages of a textbook, but in the flickering shadows dancing upon temple walls. In Kumbakonam, South India, the boy would often sit upon the stone steps of temples, using a slate pencil to trace exquisite, infinite lines in the dust. Lacking the means to purchase paper, he learned to perform 10,000 deductions within the theater of his mind until a perfect equation materialized. While his peers chased the ghosts of secular prestige, Ramanujan was hopelessly entangled in the mists of numbers. Working as a clerk in a local accounting office, his only earthly wealth consisted of 3 thick, hand-bound notebooks overflowing with singular formulas. To him, mathematics was not a mere academic discipline, but a form of religious devotion. He famously remarked, "An equation for me has no meaning, unless it expresses a thought of God." This radical purity left him isolated in his homeland, dismissed as an eccentric clerk drowning in delusions. Yet, he never wavered, for every night, the goddess of Namakkal would appear behind a crimson veil in his dreams, revealing the foundational secrets of the cosmos. This transdimensional communion became the sole radiance in his impoverished life and the primal spark that eventually drove him across the great oceans. Upon Professor Hardy's insistent urging, Ramanujan finally boarded a steamship for England in 1914. For a devout Brahmin, crossing the black waters meant defying ancestral taboos, yet his hunger for knowledge proved stronger than his fear of divine retribution. However, when he stepped from his carriage into the biting winter of Cambridge, he found himself facing a frigid iceberg of Western convention. Here, the academic world demanded seamless logical rigor, yet Ramanujan scarcely understood the concept of a formal proof. He was accustomed to leaping directly to the finish line, for the destination was already visible in his dreams, whereas Hardy demanded he return to the start and trace every footprint of logic. This cultural schism caused Ramanujan unprecedented agony. He was like a master composer being forced to labor over the basics of music theory. In his damp, sunless dormitory, he remained steadfast in his faith, cooking his own vegetarian meals and refusing to light a fire even in the dead of winter. His physical form began to wither in the foreign chill, but his mind operated like a precision instrument running at an impossible frequency. Hardy once mused that if mathematical genius were scored from 0 to 100, he would award himself a 25, but Ramanujan a full 100. 2 souls walked side by side through the Cambridge twilights, one representing the apex of Western reason, the other a vessel of Eastern fever, together weaving the most luminous chapters of modern mathematics. By 1917, as the smoke of the Great War choked Europe, life in England grew increasingly grueling, and Ramanujan's health began to fail. He coughed incessantly upon his sickbed, a casualty of chronic malnutrition and the relentless overdrawing of his mental reserves. While he was confined to a sanatorium, an encounter occurred that has since become legend. Hardy came to visit, and searching for a topic of conversation, mentioned that his taxi bore the number 1729, which he remarked was a rather dull and unremarkable figure. Ramanujan, bedridden and frail, suddenly sat up with a startling brilliance in his eyes. "No, Hardy, it is a very interesting number. It is the smallest number expressible as the sum of 2 cubes in 2 different ways." Even as the embers of his life were fading, numbers remained his living companions, his oldest friends. Amidst the throes of illness, he began to conceive what posterity would call the lost notebook. The formulas he scrawled on scraps of paper during those days would be discovered half a century later, found to perfectly predict the entropy of black holes. In that clinical room smelling of antiseptic, he could still hear the bells of his home temple and feel the goddess's fingertips brushing against the void. This total detachment from the material world afforded him a tranquility that bordered on the divine. Even in the depths of despair. In 1919, his physical form broken, Ramanujan returned to the India he had so desperately missed. He did not return as a conquering hero, but as a ghost-like wanderer, returning to the side of his wife, Janaki. In the final 12 months of his life, though he could scarcely leave his bed, the manuscripts he produced were more feverish and visionary than ever before. He wrote without pause until his nibs wore down and his fingers trembled too violently to hold a pen. He sensed his impending return to the mathematical void where his goddess resided, and so he raced to commit the last of his secrets to paper before the curtain fell. The familiar sweltering heat of his homeland returned. The humid sea breeze drifted into his room, softening his labored breaths. No longer did he fret over the proofs Hardy demanded. He returned to his primal intuition, to the realm of the hallowed. In April 1920, at the age of 32, Ramanujan quietly closed his eyes in Kumbakonam. He departed this world leaving behind only 3 disorganized notebooks and a pile of loose scraps, the most precious inheritance ever bequeathed to humanity. He was like a divine messenger who had strayed into the mortal realm. His mission complete, he vanished, leaving a world of mortals on the shore, forever contemplating the wake of his departure. When modern scientists use supercomputers to verify the formulas Ramanujan left behind, they are invariably struck by a bone-deep shiver of awe. He had never seen a textbook on the theory of complex functions, yet he could directly transcribe series that would take experts years to derive. The enigma of the goddess in his dreams mentioned in our prologue may not be a mere superstition, but rather a romantic metaphor for the heights of human intuition at its most sublime. Ramanujan's life proved that beyond this world of rigid logic and rules, there remains a shortcut to the truth. It is a path of faith, a privilege reserved for the solitary genius. Our story tonight concludes. I hope the crystalline purity of this mathematical saint brings you a measure of solace in the deep of the night. Now, let the complex symbols and the tedious proofs drift away with the wind. You need not understand the heights of mathematics. You only need, like Ramanujan, to believe that within this clamorous universe, there still exists a supreme balance and tranquility. Now, close your eyes and in the ocean of your dreams, find that equation of peace that belongs to you alone. Good night.